Hello, data collectors. Welcome to stop 1 of the ROR series. This is the resentment infection, how resentment spreads through nervous systems, relationships, and emotional environments. If you are new, welcome. My name is Savannah Kizzy Rye. And I am here, the safari conductor, as we travel through human experience. We are going to be collecting data as we all learn together, myself included, how to rewire out of resentment. Welcome to Stop 1. This stop introduces the foundational framework of the entire ROR series. In this stop, we begin exploring resentment, not simply as an emotion, attitude, or personality flaw, but as an adaptive infection pattern that spreads through nervous systems, relational environments, family systems, and social conditioning. We are learning how resentment forms, what environments allow it to grow, how it spreads, and why so many people unknowingly live inside emotional contagion cycles without realizing it. Let's zoom into environments that can become breeding grounds for resentment. The most common areas I have seen are with those who tend to be overfunctioners, people pleasers, those who struggle with emotional invisibility, and mothers with no life, hobbies, or unachieved goals outside of their role as a mother and a wife. Over time, when we stay suppressing, overfunctioning, etc., we get pulled out of our window of tolerance. When we are pulled out of our window of tolerance and we stay out of it for long periods of time, we start to develop resentment. The infection has begun, but we must be careful. Once we have the infection, it is really easy to get hit harder because the system is weaker and more susceptible to the craving for bonding. Those with high resentment levels tend to want to bond via shared gossip, dislike for others, or the need to complain about their partner with blind loyalty friends or friends who are also stuck in similar patterns. Don't get me wrong, co-regulation is necessary, and us ladies need to process a lot in order to regulate, but check your regulation session. Is it mostly you repeating the same upset? If so, you may be co-ruminating in a self-destructive way instead of a helpful way. Why might it be self-destructive? Well, who do you typically co-ruminate with? And do you ever challenge the blind spots? Do you end with reflection on what is in your control? If not, we're in a self-destructive loop. Chronic self-abandonment is the biggest behavior leading to resentment. If we think of resentment as a bacteria that thrives and spreads like mold, we would explore which environments the resentment infection spreads and grows in the fastest. Here are some examples where, if the following behaviors exist in environments, I can guarantee you someone in there is struggling with resentment. Here's the list: avoidance, emotional dishonesty, chronic survival mode, hypervigilance, emotional rigidity, suppressed grief, unresolved attachment wounds, repetitive relational gridlock. How do you suspect the infection spreads? Anyone? Bueller? Through tone, through energy, through interpretation, through emotional leakage, defensiveness, withdrawal, criticism, passive aggression, silence, projection, chronic emotional exhaustion. And let me tell you something, ladies. That has us written all over it. That isn't saying that men don't do this too. It's just saying, come on, we do this a lot. Let's start with emotional leakage, okay? People often believe resentment only exists in words, but resentment leaks long before it speaks. It leaks through body language, sarcasm, sighs, irritability, shutdown, avoidance, emotional numbness, hypercriticism, scorekeeping, contempt, chronic nervous system tension. What we also have to understand is children absorb it, partners absorb it, co-workers absorb it, and families absorb it. Research consistently demonstrates that human beings are consistently or constantly reading one another's emotional states through nonverbal communication. That scanning. We're just locked in, ready, waiting for somebody to twitch at us wrong. According to Stephen Porg's Polyvagal Theory 2011, the nervous system is continuously scanning the environment for cues of safety or danger through facial expressions, tone of voice, body posture, and relational energy. In other words, even when nothing is being verbally said, the body is still communicating. This is why unresolved resentment eventually creates emotional climates where play disappears, curiosity disappears, softness disappears, as well as repair feels exhausting. Now, and once all of this disappears, the connection begins feeling unsafe. John Gottman's research on relationships found that contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and withdrawal are among the strongest predictors of relational distress and disconnection. Gottman and Silver, 1999. Long before a relationship falls apart, the emotional climate often shifts first. Louis Cozolino, 2014, reminds us that we are social creatures whose nervous systems are constantly influencing one another. We regulate together, dysregulate together, and often absorb emotional states without realizing it. In other words, resentment becomes atmospheric. Now, emotional cost and nervous system currency. One of the core ROR concepts is understanding energy as currency. I call it energy expense. Everything costs something emotionally. Conflict costs energy, suppression costs energy, masking costs, over-explaining, avoidance, hypervigilance, all of it costs energy. Many people are emotionally bankrupt without realizing it, and when the nervous system becomes depleted, resentment becomes easier to access than joy. Why do you think that is? My theory is because resentment requires less vulnerability. Joy requires openness. Play requires flexibility. Connection, that's going to require risk. Resentment often feels emotionally safer because it protects the nervous system from disappointment, grief, vulnerability, and uncertainty. But let's do a quick cost-benefit analysis. In psychology, a cost-benefit analysis is simply a process of examining what a behavior, thought pattern, belief, or coping strategy gives us versus what it costs us. Now, most behaviors persist because there is some benefit, even if that benefit is unconscious. Now, for those of you, I'm going to go on a little tangent real quick. For those of you who read the book, The Courage to Be Disliked, in that book, there was an example of a kid with agoraphobia who wouldn't leave, and the mom and the parents were so worried. Oh my God, my baby has agoraphobia. And they were worried like most parents would be. That worry turns into over-caring. Now this child is getting all this love and attention. What is the motivating force to outgrow agoraphobia if I'm going to get all of this secondary gain in mom's love? This might even create a narrative in the person that believes if I heal, if I get better, if I improve, I will lose all this love. Do you see where I'm going with that? So, what is the benefit of resentment? What I have seen in my clinical practice, as well as within myself, is that one of the biggest benefits is stagnation. We get to stay in the comfy, cozy zone where development does not occur. We get to avoid uncertainty. We get to avoid vulnerability. We get to avoid accountability. We get to avoid looking at our own role in the dance. We get to constantly complain about the things we are suffering with. Sometimes that in itself comes with a secondary gain, which could be seen as a benefit. Maybe we receive validation, or we receive sympathy, or attention. Maybe we receive a sense of belonging through shared frustration. That right there is one of the key things I'm seeing in the collective today. Maybe we get to stay connected to a familiar identity. The cost of this, though, is stagnation. You're looping in that revolving door over and over again. And over time, that resentment builds and it begins infiltrating perception. Now, for those of you who are new, perception is the root of my work. The longer resentment remains unchecked, the more likely we are to interpret neutral situations through a contaminated lens. We stop seeing what is happening and start seeing what we expect to happen. Now, why on earth would some of us want what we expect? Yep, good old confirmation bias. We begin collecting evidence for our pain. We begin filtering out evidence that challenges the story, and before we know it, resentment is no longer something we experience. It becomes the lens through which we experience everything day to day. For those of you who are new to my corner of the internet, I would encourage you to start with my first YouTube video on perception, and I will link that down below. Because if resentment is the infection, perception is often where we first begin seeing the side effects of the resentment buildup. Research on chronic stress and trauma suggests that prolonged activation of the nervous system narrows our capacity for flexibility, curiosity, connection, and play. Van der Kolk, 2014. When the body is exhausted, survival becomes the priority. The nervous system begins choosing predictability over possibility, protection, openness over openness, and certainty over vulnerability. You see, certainty is what we all want in this world today. But think about it. Much of what we are certain about is linked to suffering. That is a key indicator that you are in a protector part frequency. Stephen Parks, 2011, explains that nervous system is constantly evaluating whether the environment is safe enough to engage socially. When the body perceives threat, it stops caring about joy. It stops caring about fun. It stops caring about connection. The nervous system is trying to survive. Think about it. If you were being chased by a bear, you wouldn't be worried about date night, pickleball, painting, gardening, or trying a new hobby. You would be worried about staying alive. The problem is that many of us are carrying around nervous systems that act like the bear is still there. So when somebody says, "Why don't you go have fun?" Or, "Why don't you try something new?" the body says, "Absolutely not." This has nothing to do with not wanting joy or connection, but because the nervous system has spent so much time surviving that it has forgotten how to play. I don't know about you, but I'm always down to play. Your girl is a child. Now, this is one of the reasons resentment becomes such a powerful trap. Resentment is familiar. The disappointment is familiar. So is the frustration, the criticism, the story. The body knows exactly what to do there because it has asked us to become curious. It asks us to be present. It asks us to risk disappointment again. And for many people, that feels far more dangerous than staying angry. This is why I believe resentment can become a baseline for functioning. The nervous system will often choose familiar suffering over unfamiliar peace. Many of us have never actually learned how to live on the lake. We learned how to survive in the storm waves because we were born there. So when the water finally becomes calm, we don't relax. We freak out because WTF is down there. Oh my gosh. We start looking around wondering, what is wrong? We start anticipating the next wave. In doing all of this, we do not realize we create our own waves. That is why this work is not simply about reducing resentment. It is about teaching the nervous system that safety, play, joy, curiosity, and connection are not threats. They are skills that many of us never had the opportunity to develop. Bruce Perry's work similarly highlights that stressed and dysregulated nervous systems lose access to higher order functioning. When survival states dominate our ability to reflect, empathize, and problem solve, connection becomes significantly reduced. Perry and Winfrey, 2021. Lisa Feldman Barrett, 2017, she further argues that the brain is constantly managing a body budget. Every decision, emotional response, stressor, conflict, and interaction either deposits into or withdraws from that budget. When the account runs low, the brain becomes more reactive, less flexible, and increasingly focused on conserving resources. Now, this is why resentment can become so seductive, because it gives us a story, it gives us certainty, it gives us someone to blame. Resentment allows us to externalize discomfort instead of tolerating the vulnerability required for curiosity. Joy asks us to soften. Joy asks us to stay present. Joy asks us to risk disappointment. It also asks us to remain open even when certainty would feel safer. Now, for many nervous systems, especially those accustomed to survival, softening feels far more dangerous than staying armored. This is one of the central hypotheses of the Rewiring Out of Resentment project. That regulated joy may serve as a corrective emotional experience capable of restoring nervous system flexibility, increasing emotional capacity, and interrupting chronic resentment loops long enough for deeper repair to occur. The glove up concept. In future stops, we'll expand deeper into the concept of gloving up. That will be for those who watch the orientation for ROR. It will be a crayon to add to the crayon box. So when you see that crayon emoji, just know that piece of work is a skill. Now, for those of you who don't understand what I'm talking about when I say crayons, I have linked that article down below for you. Let's just check in and take a nice little breath. My nervous system needs it sometimes. For now, let's think of gloves as an emotional protective equipment, not emotional walls, not avoidance, and not detachment. Skills. Pause, observation, discernment, regulation, compartmentalization, non-reactivity, boundary awareness, emotional responsibility. But most importantly, the acceptance that multiple things can be true. Ding, 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 that means nuance. Not just what you feel, think, and believe. Many of us enter emotionally charged situations completely unprotected, absorbing everyone else's emotions, projections, expectations, and nervous system activation without realizing it. Then we wonder why we leave interactions emotionally contaminated. The goal here is not emotional numbness. No, no, no. We feel on this corner of the internet. We metabolize. The goal is learning how to stay present without emotionally raw dogging every environment we enter. Think of it this way. Do we pick up shit with our bare hands? I know I don't. Now, research on emotional regulation and family systems repeatedly points to the importance of differentiation, which is our ability to remain connected to others without becoming emotionally fused with them. Bowen, 1978. So in simple terms, differentiation allows us to stay in the room without becoming the room. It allows us to witness someone's distress without automatically making it ours. My emotional sponges. It allows us to stay grounded in our values, observations, and reality while remaining open to the reality of another person. That is what the gloves are. They're not disconnection or superiority or avoidance. It's protection through skill. The field observation. One of the most important things to understand: resentment is rarely caused by one singular event. It usually is cumulative. Micro moments, repeated disappointments, unspoken truths, chronic emotional suppression, invisible labor, perceived inequality, inherited modeling, emotional exhaustion. Eventually, the nervous system adapts to expecting disappointment. This expectation becomes perceptual, meaning the brain starts scanning for confirmation. This is where resentment narrows interpretation and reduces relational flexibility. The nervous system stops asking, what else could this mean? And it starts assuming, see, here we go again. Cognitive psychology has demonstrated that human beings naturally search for evidence that supports pre-existing beliefs while overlooking information that challenges them. Beck, 1976, Kahneman, 2011. Once resentment takes hold, the brain becomes increasingly efficient at gathering evidence that confirms the resentment story. Now, this is why I lecture y'all about them algorithms, the Pavlovian conditioning machines, because it will very well keep you there. John Gottman refers to a similar phenomenon as negative sentiment override. In this state, even neutral or positive interactions become filtered through a negative lens because the emotional climate of the relationship has become contaminated. Gottman and Silver, 1999. This is something I've seen in my personal life, with my friendships, with my clients, all the time. Couples that are stuck in this dynamic, even when their partner does something positive, they don't see it. They don't, because they've been stuck in the resentment for so long. Many of us are anticipating the very pattern from our partner. We scoff at the idea of them doing anything to improve or change. We dismiss attempts before they have the opportunity to become real, and we don't realize that we're doing it. This is why you have to be very careful of what y'all are consuming. I know we talk a lot of crap about men and pornography, ladies. I need y'all to look at your scum books. It's the same shit, and it's a hill I'ma die on. Now, many of my couple sessions result in individuals not necessarily wanting repair. They want me to validate them in front of their partner so they can feel justified in whatever it is that they're doing at home. That's the issue. If I had $1 for every time I asked, how badly do you want to confirm that as true? You see, when we are stuck in resentment for long periods of time, this is where Dr. Joe Dispenza's work comes in. Over time, that mood becomes a temperament. That temperament becomes a personality. That personality becomes a predictable way of interacting with the world. The brain and body becomes habitually wired into expecting the very thing they do not want. Neuroscience research on neuroplasticity supports the idea that repeatedly activated neural pathways become increasingly efficient over time. Doidge, 2007. The more we rehearse disappointment, suspicion, criticism, and resentment, the easier those pathways become to access. This is where those frequent flyer miles come in, because many of us are frequently flying the neural pathways of resentment, robbing us of the blessings to repair. So when your partner does something to shift out of the pattern, many people immediately question it as suspicion. They look for the catch. They wait for the other shoe to drop. They anticipate failure. That suspicion often leads the other partner to feel rejected in their efforts to change, causing them to internalize beliefs about whether change is even worth attempting. Especially when the person they are trying to reconnect with has already decided they don't believe it, and now both people are trapped. One person is trying to prove they can change. The other person is trying to prove they can't. That is a resentment. That right there is resentment's favorite little playground. Now, this week's field work. Your assignment this week is not about fixing anything. This week is about observation. Your assignment is to begin noticing where resentment leaks, where environments intensify it, what environments intensify it, what interactions drain your energy, and how often your nervous system anticipates conflict before it even happens. You are also encouraged to begin implementing the joy experiment that was introduced during orientation. Movement, novelty, walks, play, sensory regulation, intentional pauses, recreational activities, or movements of emotional compartmentalization. That's the practice, that's the work. And it's not because you feel like it. Let's be real, because if we all waited till we got things done because we felt like it, nothing would ever get done. This experiment is testing whether regulated joy can interrupt emotional gridlock patterns long enough for deeper repair work to eventually occur. My husband and I have been implementing this practice as well, as we have found ourselves caught in a season of resentment with each other. If I can be honest, between you all and me, much of our resentment comes from inherited scripts. It also does not help the dynamic that my mother-in-law lives with us. She, in all Indian mom fashion, brought all of her expectations into our home. Part of what my husband has to learn is building the culture that we make, regardless of how his mother feels about it. And men, I say this with love, many of you are okay, completely okay, with upsetting your wife instead of upsetting your family. And it shows. Let me ask you something, especially for those who are living with their own or are living in their own homes. What's the worst that can happen if you disappoint your mother? What's the worst that can happen when you prioritize the family you created instead of the script your mother fused into you? One thing I have noticed about Indian families, and the same rings true for multiple cultural dynamics, is that internalized patriarchy lives within women. I have learned how to not allow my mother-in-law's pollution and expectations to create nervous system movement within my home and within me. And as someone with my own mother wound, God is testing me with her presence in my home. Because goodness, it is very blatant how certain cultures view women. It is very blatant. Now, this is where the real exposure therapy comes in. It's easy for me to shrink because she's an elder. But the roles change when elders move into your home. This is something many elder generations do not want to hear. And it's why it's the culture, it's the religion, is the common statement many use to sort of dead the conversation about their accountability. I don't buy it. I don't buy it though. It has nothing to do with culture and religion if it is not applied consistently across all members of the family. My husband and I, we were both scapegoats. Very much so. And my mother-in-law does not have a daughter. And I was the only girl in my family, so it's a rude awakening for her having me in her life, because I'm very outspoken and I'm not going to tolerate that. Absolutely not. Not in my own house. Absolutely not. Now, if we were in her house, it would be a very different story. Now, here's where the exposure therapy work for me is because I have to learn how to reparent myself because the amygdala doesn't have eyes. It doesn't. And just like how some of us ladies, we feel like we have to be productive. Some of us are getting up when we hear our husband come home and we have to start acting productive. That's not because of your husband. That's just because of the old script. And many of us women, sometimes we're trying to reach the bar the mother-in-law created or our mother created. When incongruences are present, we are often looking at family system dynamics, scapegoat dynamics, and the inability to admit that those dynamics exist. All of this leads us, as individuals, to chase the approval of our parents. And sometimes they're not even around us in the vicinity, in our homes, in our state, or they may have crossed over and we're still trying to prove ourselves to them. This is where regression shows up. And I really do think that we need to emphasize it here because it needs compassion and grace. We are choosing each other, especially if you're married. It's really easy. It's so fascinating how quick some of us are to just automatically be done just because it gets hard. If you have not healed those wounds, you will end up always chasing the approval of a parent who will never give that approval to you. That's what happens with the narcissistic need to be needed. Priority becomes their needs, especially when those needs are based on severely outdated scripts. Men will end up enabling the disrespect their mothers show towards their wife without even realizing it. Simply because they are in the regressed frequency. Ladies, we all get in that regressed frequency as well. I call it panic child energy. And I'll be completely honest, the last 2 years since my mother-in-law moved in with us, I have been in panic child energy because I see the signs. I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna go off the cliff. This is not sustainable. Ah, crisis. We forget that the men we love also had to survive their upbringing too. I am not the only one with a mother wound in this marriage. My husband also has one. I have to have grace for that. And the wound lives in our home. Some of us don't consider that. This is where the grace and compassion is necessary. And the internet is not going to teach this because it benefits from the chaos, the dysfunction, and the emotional cutoffs. That's why this work is not about blame. It's about understanding what happens to the nervous system and the mind when we are around our family of origin. And all that was sedimented from childhood gets brought back to the surface. Family systems research has long observed that adults often regress into earlier roles, emotional patterns, and attachment behaviors when interacting with their family of origin. Bowen, 1978. In other words, highly capable adults can suddenly find themselves thinking, feeling, and behaving much like younger versions of themselves when old family dynamics are activated. Trust me, this rings true even for me. I'm always like, fire, jump. There was this reel I saw of a little kid and it was walking in like intrusive thoughts. I wanted to just jump in the water and the parent grabbed. That's me. Now, through the joy experiment, my husband and I realized that physical activity through recreational sports brings us joy. I'm competitive, so whooping his ass in recreational activity feels very satisfying as a regulation tool. Until next time, your assignment is simple. Continue the joy experiment. Collect data. Observe your nervous system. Notice where resentment shows up. Notice where resistance shows up. Notice where you want to turn around. Notice where you want to quit. Notice where you want to prove the hypothesis wrong. Most importantly, notice what happens when you choose to participate anyways. Part of the joy experiment is I challenge y'all. No, better yet, I double dog dare you all. When you try to go on date night or implementing the joy activity with your partner, you probably will get in an argument along the way. Sit in it. Do not turn around. Stay in silence and still show up for the event. I double dog dare you. When we do this work, we must understand. Savannah, are you listening? The goal is not perfection. The goal is observation. The goal is collecting evidence. The goal is becoming curious about your own patterns rather than automatically believing them. As the safari continues, There will be additional stops, side quests, field observations, and a few surprise tools along the way. If you see the crayon emoji, pay attention. It means we're adding a new skill to the crayon box. For now, keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle at all times, okay? If something stings, activates, irritates, or challenges you, don't panic. Collect the data. The safari has officially begun. I will see you all out there. And again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for being here. Thank you for being open, heart open to this work, because connection is what humanity needs, not division. As always, come as you are, where you are. For those of you who want further exploration, I've linked the references down, as well as extended reading opportunities, because knowledge is power. Ignorance is a choice. I'll see y'all out there.